Hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining our webinar today. Today we're going to be diving into the strange situation we all find ourselves in right now. We spent 2 years in and out of lockdowns, maybe saving up a bit of money, thinking about all the things we're going to treat ourselves to when the pandemic was less of an issue, just generally making up for all that lost time. But then something odd happened. Just as most people got vaccinated and saw their countries remove COVID restrictions, the global economy started to shift. Now suddenly bills are increasing, gas is more expensive, and we're all trying to balance those two very different desires, to go out, splash the cash, and enjoy life, but also to count the pennies, what we call the consumer dilemma. I think the tweet you see on screen summarizes the situation fairly nicely. We're all aware that prices are going up and that the economic picture looks less rosy than it did, say, a year ago. But it's human nature to want to find ways to treat yourself regardless. And that'll be one of the key themes I talk about today. My name's Chris, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm a trends manager here at GWI, based in our London office. Now, we've got lots to cover today, so before we move on to the insights, we just want to give you a quick overview of who we are and what we do. For anyone who's unfamiliar, we're a target audience company who provide consumer insights to leading brands, marketing agencies, and media organizations worldwide. We're also home to the world's largest survey on the digital consumer. We make our global data available through our intuitive subscription-based platform, which allows teams to dive in and cross-analyze different data points and audiences to better understand consumers. And the research you'll see today is from a whole host of our data products, giving unparalleled insight into the modern-day consumer across the globe. And I know we have listeners today from all over the world, so I just want to say we've done our best to make everything you see here today as relevant to as many of you as possible. We'll focus on certain European markets or the US from time to time, but for the most part, we're trying to lay out what the story looks like, what the consumer dilemma looks like at a global level. Now, the big headline we've uncovered from our recent research is this. Consumers are absolutely feeling the pinch. This is very definitely a here and now kind of issue. People are already feeling the impact on their bottom line. 2/3 of consumers have already felt some impact from inflation, and around a quarter say they're not very or not at all financially secure. The sad thing about all this, of course, is that it's probably not going to get much better anytime soon. Here in the UK, our energy bills are set to increase again in October after a pretty hefty increase in April. And the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, as well as the ripple effects from China's lockdowns, are likely to stoke inflation even further. And all of this is starting to gnaw away at consumer confidence. Now, I should establish a bit of context for the data that you see on screen. In the summer of 2020, we were very much at the peak of COVID uncertainty, and consumer confidence absolutely plummeted, as you can see. This was at a time before the vaccines, before we knew the vaccines could even be made, when it really wasn't clear what sort of economic damage it would wreak on the world. Generally speaking, those days in 2020 were characterized by shock, a sudden impact from something unexpected. What we're seeing now is more of a slow burn and a growing sense of unease. And as the worst of the pandemic passed and some kind of normality emerged, consumer confidence tentatively climbed back up to pre-pandemic levels, but now we're starting to see it dip. It's only a modest dip for now, but we're seeing signals from our recent research that it will dip more. And there's a pattern we tend to see in our research where consumers worry about things in the abstract before worrying about their personal circumstances. So it may look not modest for now, but these are signals we're used to seeing that will indicate a future drop. The other thing to know is that the number of consumers who think their finances will get worse is definitely increasing. And that points to an important takeaway that we should establish early on. What happens over the next few months won't affect everyone in the same way. Quite simply, not everyone is going to feel the pinch to the same degree. Some consumers will be able to keep their spending power even as prices rise. But for marketers, this group is going to be particularly valuable as a revenue stream during a downturn. We often talk about consumers trading down in a recession, but I think particularly given the COVID context, those consumers who are going to trade up to more premium options is just as important. Having new items or services at a higher price point that can get more money from these very adventurous revenge spenders. I think the context of the last 2 years is super important and something that is being missed from some analysis of the current situation. I think the natural point of comparison for what we're experiencing now is with the so-called Great Recession of 2008, 2009, the years after that. And we will do that during the webinar today. I think it's a very useful exercise. But one big difference, I think, will be that we won't have that same cultural move away from conspicuous consumption in quite the same way. You think back to that time, and one of the big cultural trends was minimalism. It's when we really started to see, exposed brick walls, those industrial style bulbs. That's the kind of design that became very popular. Fashion styles became a lot more subdued and logos tended to be less visible. You had songs like I Need a Dollar by Alu Black. And here in the UK, we had Keep Calm and Carry On, design trends that seem to represent the general spirit of belt tightening and austerity. And as a cultural trend, it spread over even to the people who continued to splash out. Luxury and spending as a whole became a lot more discreet. But I think 2022 is going to be a bit different just because that pent-up demand is so high. And as far as premium options are concerned and how you bring in premium options into a strategy, I think QSR or fast food brands are a really good case study to look at because they're really affected by food price increases at the moment. And because the profit margins are so narrow, every cent makes a difference, they have to react very quickly. They're one of the first industries that have to react to inflation. I think how they do it is pretty instructive. There's the obvious side, which is staying competitive on the basic menu items and putting forward a strong value offering. But they also try out new premium items with higher margins that can cover rising costs elsewhere. So as an example, Shake Shack in the US has been experimenting over the last few months with more premium menu items, burgers with ingredients like black truffle and Parmesan cheese that can cover their core items, making less profit. And it's a small example, but I think it's a useful one to say early on to show how, consumers that are going to spend more will be so important to any type of business in the coming months. But for the majority of people, the rest of 2022 is going to be a story about thrift. And this is going completely against the grain of what consumers want to do when they came out of lockdown. And I think it's useful to rewind a little bit, see just how much attitudes have changed. So after lockdowns in the US, the biggest change consumers reported in their attitudes was feeling more daring. They were keen to go out into the world, spend money, tick off once-in-a-lifetime experiences, and just generally be a bit what you might call YOLO. At the same time, we saw a big drop in self-reported thriftiness. Consumers were saving money from not moving around. They had cash from stimulus checks in many cases. They were more likely to spend and spend big. Now, that's what the situation looked like in 2021. But from what we've seen so far in 2022, this situation is completely reversing. The trend is basically going backwards. Thriftiness is now back on the agenda and consumers are less impulsive than they were. It's very easy to get drawn into the debate about whether or not we'll see an actual bona fide recession. But I think for most consumers, it's an academic issue. For many of them, it will feel like one, and they'll be a lot more careful about their spending as a result. And there's some more fascinating data out of the US that really validates this. So since last year, the biggest fall in life priorities has been becoming rich, while the fastest growing one has been achieving financial security. And I think this goes a long way to show how people's expectations, the whole financial outlook has changed. People aren't as interested or thinking as much about seeing their bank balance grow. It's just about making sure they stay in the black. It's security over prosperity. People are much more modest about what their future looks like, and it's all a sign of that creeping pessimism, that general sense of unease. So most consumers aren't going to be spending as much as they originally wanted to in the next few months. And we can draw some conclusions based on their spending habits and intentions about where their play budget and other budgets will go over the next few months. And again, through all of this, I want us to think about the patterns we saw in the 2008-09 recession. While there will be some differences, technology is very different, and these are situations with two very different causes. I think there's still a lot we can learn from it, and maybe some common misconceptions we can overturn. Now, if I asked you to think about which brands and which retailers benefited or survived the 2008 recession strongest, I'd suggest you'd come up with a list of names similar to the ones on screen. These are brands that appeal to cost-conscious consumers, typically offering one of the cheapest options in the market. I certainly remember from my local high street at that time when many stores are closing down, chains are going into administration, these are the ones that kept on going. But there were some more unexpected winners in that time, brands selling things like high-end lingerie and bikes, and they should signal to us that consumer behavior is often more complicated than you might think. And it's rarely as ever as simple as unearthing the cheapest option. For example, Brompton is a company that makes foldable bikes that sell for hundreds of pounds. And they had a good recession last time around because despite that high cost, they appealed to people who wanted to save money in the long run on car fuel or public transport. It represented investment. It represented good value for money. And this is true to a degree, even for a brand like Hermes. Luxury brands tend to be more resilient to recessions, but I think Hermes is a special case because its crocodile skin bags, its famous bags, have a limited supply, and they are actually viewed as a kind of investment by many people who buy them. It sounds bizarre, but even senior people at the firm will talk about how one of their bags is cost effective because the leather will last forever. If you think about the years that it will be owned, it represents a decent investment. And it seems strange for a luxury purchase, but a sense of good value is a part of the consumer's psychology, I think. In a strange way, it represents good value for money. There's other interesting stories here too. Lingerie and entertainment brands did well during the last recession as people entertain themselves at home more. If you haven't heard of Love Film, it was an early player in the video streaming market here in the UK before it was bought up by Amazon. And you might remember this, but during the last recession, one of the buzzwords was cocooning, which does seem a bit like a quaint concept after we've had 2 years of a pandemic and all its lockdowns. But the basic idea is that in a recession, people spend less on going out and they revert to cheaper home entertainment, even if they have to, say, invest in buying a games console to begin with. And actually, flat screen TVs were one of the more unexpected success stories of that time too. And it shows just how technology and forms of entertainment become important when times are hard. So the next few months are going to be very interesting. Based on some of our recent research, I think that home entertainment will hold up a lot better than many people are predicting after Netflix's recent drop in subscribers. Everyone's very keen to leave the house after being in lockdown for so long, which does make it a bit hard to predict. But it is, at the end of the day, fundamentally cheaper than going to a bar and buying lots of drinks, for example. The key is, of course, whether TV subscription services, games consoles, or any kind of home entertainment is perceived to offer good value for money. So what kinds of purchases are in demand this time around? Well, white goods and home furniture will be in for a tough time. They're being hit by a double whammy of people spending a lot less time at home than they were a year ago and just not being interested in kitting out their home environment as they were, and being expensive purchases. And it feels a bit reminiscent of 2008, where UK retailers like MFI, Land of Leather, and Rosebees went into administration, and in the US, it was chains like Bombay and Levitt's. Medication is obviously spiking because we're now all getting colds from each other again, but I find the growth in hairstyling tools and cosmetics particularly interesting. Some of this is people going out and about after COVID, but I think it confirms something we know from early recessions. People look to smaller, more affordable treats during those times, and cosmetics are a classic example. The more that people do this, the fact they do it is sometimes called the lipstick effect by economists. So we just saw which purchases are up year on year, but we can gaze further into the crystal ball by looking at trends in planned purchases, which tells us more about which categories will hold up over the next few months. And as we saw before, it's not looking like good news for big ticket domestic items like white goods, but some growing categories have quite surprising potential. Having been off the agenda for so long, consumers are still very keen to go to concerts, and it might help that they're a more affordable use of an entertainment budget than some choices, like a full-blown vacation. I think electric scooters are an interesting one, and it could be like a Brompton bike kind of thing, where people are thinking about how to save money on transport. Jewelry is, I think, a bit like those earlier examples we saw of cosmetics and of lingerie, of providing a measure of comfort in trying times, in addition to affluent consumers wanting to treat themselves. And smart wearables, I think, are another interesting one. Our research shows that running and exercise was an incredibly sticky habit from lockdowns, and it might have created a health is wealth type of mindset. And it again shows you the products that do well are all about the value they can communicate to consumers. We can get further clues into how consumers are thinking by looking at which brands are doing better this year and attracting more shoppers compared to last. And you'll notice there's some familiar faces from the last recession here. So in the US, we see that, true to what we've just seen, Victoria's Secret and Sephora are doing well, showing that lingerie and jewelry could be fairly resilient, along with the more cost-focused discount brands you might expect, some of which we've already seen did well in 2008. In the UK, TJ Maxx trades as TK Maxx, and it's also been one of the best performers over here in the past year. And I think it's a really interesting case study about how consumer psychology works in a recession. We also see Primark and Zara, two very cost-competitive retailers, doing well. But I think that jumble sale aspect of TJ or TK Maxx really resonates with some people. You come out of the store feeling validated, you found something no one else has, you just generally discovered something that seems serendipitous. So even though it's cost-conscious shopping, it feels rewarding. Now, I've already alluded to this several times, and it's something that I think everyone listening knows deep down, but it really is worth repeating, and it's what we're going to fully uncover in this next section. In a downturn, it's very easy to be obsessed about focusing on the bottom line, cutting costs everywhere, doing promotions all over the place, and perhaps getting stuck in a race to the bottom on price. Now, price is massively important to consumers. We see it time and time again of the factors they consider when they're buying something. Price is almost always at the top or very close to it. And if it's a tactic you can use, it obviously makes sense to do so. But it's not possible or desirable for all brands to try this out. Fortunately, there's other ways our research shows brands can resonate with consumers who are on the lookout for good value for money. Now, in our Core Plus dataset, we have a whole host of questions relating to different product categories, essentially around what would make someone buy something. And I'll show you over the next few slides how, based on the changes we've seen in the last few months, price is far from the only thing growing in importance. And even if you don't see the sector that you work in on these slides, I hope you'll see there's common threads here that apply across the board, and I think really tease out some wider truths. And I should point out this data is from 4 European markets, but these are all countries that were very close to the Ukraine crisis when it first began, and when we're conducting field work, and I feel they offer clues into how consumers respond as its effects spread across the world, particularly when we look at energy bills. Now, as everyone knows, energy prices have shot up this year, and it's an area where consumers are feeling the cost of living crisis most acutely. And so you probably expect price to have grown more than any other factor in importance during that time, but that's not the case. It's the ability to track usage, think smart meters and so on, that's the biggest riser. And I think it's testament that people really value a sense of control about the money they're spending, especially for something as passive as energy use. I also think we see the importance of trust in knowing a brand for yourself or having it recommended by others. In hard times, trust is really important. I find it interesting that this has grown while recommendations from price comparison websites has actually fallen. Low prices can sometimes bring an element of, is this too good to be true, or can I really trust the brands that's pricing at this level? So I don't think it's any surprise that reliability related metrics are jumping back up. Environmental credentials, on the other hand, have dropped substantially. And as you might expect when times are tight, sustainability can feel a bit like a luxury problem to many people. Now, this is a very interesting topic in its own right, and while I don't have time to fully delve into it today, I'd recommend exploring our recent content in the area on our website. Broadband internet is another one where you think the tendency is to follow the cheapest price over anything else. It's a utility where I think for many people, there isn't a huge amount of product brand differentiation. But again, while finding a cheaper deal is getting more important, it's not the only thing. As with energy, the importance of recommendations from close friends and family really helps. I mentioned Love Film earlier, and they talked a lot about the success they had with this in 2009. They're incentivizing customers to spread the word through discounts attached to inviting more people on board, and it feels like a tactic worth considering. Even something like free items added to a broadband contract are getting really resonant at the moment. It's all part of that aspect of making people feel like it's good value for money. You see more evidence of that idea of how added extras create the sense of a good deal when it comes to hotels. And here we're thinking about amenities like pools and gyms, along with two themes we've already established: good reviews and familiarity. And I think you're seeing these again and again. It should underline how universal these themes seem to be and perhaps will be across most product categories. Notice too how the importance of brand name has actually dropped. That's another classic sign of cost-cutting behavior, where consumers move to more private labels and brand names mean less. And it also shows that creating trust and being a well-known brand aren't actually synonymous. Now, that's not true of hotels, but also our final example category, which is household products. Yet again, we see how important it is to lean into product recommendations, to be seen as trustworthy, or to invoke a consumer's sense of familiarity. And once again, we see that brand name isn't as relevant. Product size is another interesting factor that communicates a sense of value beyond just the price tag. So this could mean jumbo packs of things like kitchen roll, toilet roll, washing up liquid, all those things that feel like they're the most cost-effective option, even if they're not necessarily in practice. And it's something I've mentioned many times today, but I think recent history tells us bears out in practice. Marketing is all about the creation of value in all sorts of different ways. And it can't be stressed enough how being competitive on price is a great weapon to have in your arsenal, but it's value you compete on much of the time. So how do we make sense of all we've heard today? Well, first up, as a reminder, consumers are absolutely feeling the heat at the moment. For the supply issues following on from China's zero COVID lockdowns and the crisis in Ukraine mean that further price rises are effectively baked in for the rest of 2022. And this is going to impact consumer confidence even further. But it's very much human nature to still look for a treat during times of hardship, and consumers are still doing this. Categories like jewelry, lingerie, and cosmetics are showing signs of their almost expected resilience in signs of a downturn, but fitness and home entertainment may be stickier than many are giving them credit for, thanks to what happened during the lockdowns. And we might even see some old lockdown habits come back for different reasons. It's also worth mentioning that affluent consumers won't be as fazed by any changes, and they'll probably continue with that post-pandemic YOLO mindset. And they'll be an important segment to win over. Finally, any marketer worth their salt knows that a race to the bottom of pricing doesn't really help anyone. To really resonate with consumers looking to cut costs, being the cheapest option certainly helps, but most important is making sure you look like you're offering the best value for money. And for consumers, three things in particular really seem to add up to create that sense of good value for money. There's good reviews and recommendations from others, which can be incentivized with discounts. There's trust, especially the trust that comes through knowing a brand. And another one is more straightforward. It's chucking in free extras to make a deal seem all the more appealing. So that's all from us today. Thanks very much for listening. If you have any queries or follow-ups from what you've seen today, don't hesitate to reach out to me on the email address on the screen. Expect a lot more from us on this topic as it develops in the coming weeks and months. So keep an eye out on our blog and resources page. Again, I hope you find everything you hear useful. Thanks very much for listening.